Hi everyone, this is Eran Kinsbrunner from Perfecto. Welcome to this webinar hosted by TechWell. Today we are going to discuss the 3 mobile app testing frameworks you have to know, XCUITest from Apple, Espresso from Google, and of course Appium. And with me I have here 2 distinguished guests from Perfecto, Roy Nuriel, who is a Senior Director of Product Management, as well as Uzi Eilon, the CTO from Perfecto, and they will guide us through this webinar to the entire content. So glad to have everyone with you. Hi Uzi, hi Roy.
Hey Eran, good morning.
Hey, good morning, how are you?
Excellent.
Yeah, so we are very excited, and I think it's actually it's a great opportunity for us to share some of the insight that we see, and it's also one of the indications that this topic is probably one of the hottest topic right now in the industry. Is that we saw a high amount of registration and people that joined this this webinar that indicates how much interest there is in the industry today to understand how those frameworks actually impact the testing today. So let's first start by going over the agenda, Uzi. So we're going to start with market trends. We'll talk about new CI level testing and how those frameworks actually can help us embedded into the CI. We'll talk about the differences between instrumented and non-instrumented automation frameworks. Then we'll deep dive into the technology, and we have pretty exciting demo today. I do want to highlight that we ran this webinar a few weeks ago, and there were a lot of interest, a lot of questions. We also made some progress since then, and today we're going to deep dive and highlight some of the new capabilities and additional insight that we saw since then. Okay. Before we start, we wanted to know better who joined us today. So we're now opening a poll to know how much you guys are familiar with Espresso and XCUITest. So if you already tried it, you used it, please mark that you're highly familiar with it. If you have, you just heard about it, you tried it, and but you don't really work it in production, then would be good if you can mark as that you are familiar with it. Basic knowledge, if you just now started to look at that, mark it as well. And if you're totally not familiar, I think it's a great opportunity for you to learn more and understand how Espresso XCUITest actually started to change the way that some of the organization automate their UI. UI testing as part of the automation approach. So we'll give it a few more seconds. We start to see responses are coming. Good, so it's good to see that we have a mixed audience. A lot of people heard about it. So let's move to the results. Okay, so as you can see, the majority of the people in this webinar, we have 280 people in the webinar right now. Either just heard about it but never tried it, which is good, or are not familiar. We have around 20% that either evaluated it or already embedded and have a basic implementation today, which is great. We're probably going to see it as part of the questions that would start to fly in.
Based on the results that we are seeing today, the webinar, I think, will fit all of you. First of all, we are going to introduce Espresso and XCUITest. We introduce the technology, and also we'll show you some example how to create a basic test. But also for the ones that are actually familiar with that, we'll show you how easy to connect it to the CI and how can you take advanced option on top of the this solution. So I think all of the people in this webinar will be able to find something to learn and something to get from this webinar.
Yes, that's true. And I think we're also going to cover some of the advanced capabilities. So also people that already use it today will be able to benefit and learn some stuff. So let's move on. And let's talk a little bit about the trend that we see in high level. Let's take it, a take a few steps back, look at the industry and what we see. So I think if we look at DevOps, which for us, I think it's a mega trend and what we see in the market, we do see more and more organizations adopting DevOps. And DevOps brings with it a lot of promise, a lot of excitement, but there are a lot of new challenges that comes with DevOps. And part of that is, how do I really get that fast feedback in order to deliver so quickly to the market? And that means that organization, while in most cases they are very good with a development practice, they still have a lot of challenges embedding those fast and reliable feedback as part of the DevOps process. We do see more and more, because we're accelerating, we do see more and more developers taking ownership on quality. In some case, it's the developer itself that take the ownership and start to extend from the traditional unit test that they did. In some cases, those are QA guys that are part of this feature or agile team that work side by side with developers. In some other cases, it's still QA that works separately from the development, but they are driving more and more automation that provide feedback to the developers early, either as a pre-commit automation test the developer execute, or as part of the development CI, continuous integration process. We do see, in addition, while Selenium and Appium are a great automation framework, we started, I think, in the last year or year and a half to see more and more adoption of Espresso and XCUITest, and we will discuss it further in the next couple of minutes, why we see that trend and why we see more and more Espresso and XCUITest being adopted. And in addition to that, part of that is because Espresso and XCUITest are supported by Apple and Google as like their guidance on how developers or organizations should automate more and embed more quality earlier in the process. So let's move and talk about, just to show you one example of one of our customers and how those frameworks basically change the way that they get feedback. Without getting into the name of the customer, you can see that they execute around 12,000 tests in less than 2 days. And they were able to reach that amount of automation with only 20 tests that failed, which is extremely incredible. And we haven't seen that percentage of success with Appium and Selenium. And there are several reasons that we haven't seen that. Uzi, what was your reaction when you saw that reports?
So I was very impressed from this result, because when we are using with people that actually created automation, or customers that created an Appium automation, we can see that there is like around 5% error because of the Appium connectivity and because of the application different behavior. So that's something that we are familiar with. But right now, when we execute the test together with Espresso or XCUITest, the results are amazing. And all of this 20 failure, and that actually was more interesting, was related to a real bugs. And that was really, really nice. Immediately, the noise about false negative is almost zero when we are talking about these tests.
Yeah, it's an important point. I think that the noise of false negative is critical when you want to start to embed automation into CI that constantly execute. If you have that noise, you immediately exclude that from the CI because you don't have the ability to constantly review the results and you know, have that noise while you want to focus on develop new capabilities. So that's a good point. So let's, we talked about Espresso XCUITest, but as we saw, not everyone are familiar with Espresso and XCUITest. So let's talk about what are those frameworks. So Uzi, do you want to take us through that, slide?
Okay, yes. So let's talk a little bit about why Apple, iOS, and Android, Google decide to have a new technology. So as we talked before, automation is quite hard to create. So both of the company decided that they need a stronger and more reliable UI, more reliable UI testing automation framework. This framework actually created by them in order to have the ability to run the test directly from the CI. And if we'll go down, I would like for a second to explain the differences between the way that the XCUITest and Appium works and the Espresso. So let's start to talk a little bit about how the Espresso and XCUITest works. So we'll start in the left area of this slide. We have the build machine. The build machine takes the application, takes the code of the application, and generate an APK file or IPA file, generate an application. When we are talking about Espresso and XCUITest, it actually generates two files. One is the application, APK of the application, but also an APK or IPA of the test itself. So the way that it works, after the build, we are uploading both of the files directly to a repository. It can be Perfecto Cloud, or it can be local device, but we upload it to a repository and then install both of the application on the device. And when we are starting the execution, all the executions done on the device itself. So we start the application of the test on the device itself. So remember, we have two applications, one the application under test, and second is the application which contains the test. And then when we run it, we run the test on the device. What is actually missing in this framework? Missing a good report that shows you what happened. And this is what we did in Perfecto. We added the connections between the execution itself to the report. And that's something that we are going to show today. So if we are going to talk a little bit about the high-level flow, I built my application, I created two files, I uploaded to the devices, executed it, and then see the results. And if we have more advanced cloud solution, you also will be able to see the results in a report environment. If we would like to compare it to Appium, in Appium it works differently. In Appium, I'm creating the application. It's one application. I upload it and install it on the device. And then the test itself runs directly from the client. So command after command send from the client to the device. So if I have open application, if my script contains open application, find a button and click on the button, 3 commands will be sent directly from my client to the device itself. It can work locally and it can work over the internet. If you have a cloud solution, and today most of the CI done by cloud solution, and the cloud solution become the standard of the mobile automation CI, so all of this code will be over the network. And this is why when we are talking about the execution time, and we are going to drill down for that later, it's actually much faster on the XCUITest and Espresso test, and it's a little bit slower on the Appium because of all the network capability. Another thing that you have to remember, the tests in Appium are actually living in the application. They're familiar with the object of the application. The test in XCUITest and Espresso. The test in Appium does not understand, does not know all the object, and the only way that they communicate with the application is by asking the OS system about the object tree of the application. So I think I would like to summarize everything in a huge table that explain all the differences between Appium and Espresso and XCUITest. And we also want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons for each of them.
Yeah, I think that what Uzi and I think you and I spend a lot of time with customers asking us, so we want to decide and understand which framework we need to choose, right? And those are very interesting discussions, because it's not there is right or wrong, there is different approach for automation, and that's what we wanted to highlight in this table, and we wanted to walk you through that. It really helps to understand, depend on your organization, what's the best solution for you, or what should be the approach that you should adopt. So let's start by looking at different languages, coding languages that anyone who developed those automation tests needs to know. So if we're looking at Appium, it's based on WebDriver. So there are a lot of languages that you can develop your Appium test. It can be Java, JavaScript, any kind of language almost supported with Appium. While Espresso is much more aligned to the technology stack of Android application, which is Java-based. And XCUITest, again, the same approach for iOS, which is Swift or Objective-C, that is, you need to know those languages in order to develop your test.
Exactly. So let's say that you are a tester and you don't have any familiarity with with Java or with Swift or Objective-C, and you are living in Python environment. Of course, I would recommend to use Espresso. But if you're more advanced and you have knowledge in Java or XCUITest, you have all the environment, you have XCUITest installed on your machine. So maybe you can think a little bit about moving or adding some Espresso and XCUITest to your mix. By the way, as Roy mentioned, there is no right and wrong. And in most of our organizations, we can see a mix. And we can talk a little bit about what will be a good mix after we'll finish this table.
Okay, so let's move to the next one. So as we mentioned before, I think we can go quickly over that. So Appium is basically, it's an open source. It's, you know, a lot of contributors. I think it's great. A lot of people contribute and provide some new capabilities into Appium. While on the other side, we have seen some challenges with new operating system versions that were not supported by Appium open source. In some cases, it took the community some time to close that gap. You know, if you're using Perfecto, so part of the value that we bring is that we invest and we make that investment to support new version of operating system the same day that they're available. But this is if we're looking at just pure open source. That's one of the advantages and disadvantages of the who support it. While Espresso obviously is it's much more. You have much more the back of Google that supported. The same goes for XCUITest with Appium. That's their APIs. They support it, and it's their motivation to make sure that they are constantly up at front of the technology and the new version that they release.
Exactly, and one important things about the release of a new OS system by Google or by Apple, as part of the OS system or part of the test, they're also testing this API, the XCUITest and Espresso API. So you know when you have a new Apple or when you have a new Google versions, it will support your testing environment. And that's something that you have to remember. So let's talk about what are the applications that support it. So Espresso is only for Android. It's only a support APK. XCUITest is only for Apple, only support IPA. Appium support both of them. And there is a lot of way to create one test that support both application, both APK and IPA, both Android and iOS. You have to remember when you create one script that need to be support both of the platform, that the objects may be changed or may be different between the iPhones and Android. So your framework need to manage it. But if you will have a smart framework that know how to manage different objects, or if your developers created the same object, you can create one script that runs on both of the devices. If you're talking about different developer teams, so most of the time the Android developers developing only for Android, and the iOS developer developing only for iOS. So there is no need to create one script that runs on both of them. So if the test created more by the developers or by agile teams that contains developer and tester, they are moving easily to the Espresso and XCUITest. It actually works with their internal processes.
So let's move to the next one. While with Appium, it's more like a black box approach where you don't need to have the source code then with Espresso and XCUITest, in order to develop the test, you basically you instrument the application and need to have the source code. I've added over here for the Espresso and asterisk because we started to look at the ability to develop a Espresso test without having the source code. If you're interested, by the way, you can check the Perfecto community site, and we have an article about it that can give you some tips and tricks. We're going to publish a blog probably this or next week about how this can be done, but that's in high level. It's a basic requirement to have either access to the code or familiarity with the code itself.
That's true, but it's very, very simple. If you have the code, think about Espresso and XCUITest. If you don't have access to the code, it's something that you cannot do today.
Correct.
So let's talk about the test type, black box and white box. There is a big difference between black box and white box concept. The concept of black box means that you are not familiar with anything in the application. You don't know the flow. You don't know the object. And what you need to do, you need to discover. You need to record the object. You need to discover the flows that need to happen on the application. If you are talking about white box, it means that you're familiar with everything. You're familiar with the code. You're familiar with the application. You have access to the same object repositories that the developer created. For example, if you are talking about Espresso, you can access directly to the R file and have all the objects. If you are talking about XCUITest, you have immediately access to the accessibility ID of the object. That helps you to create a very, very simple test. And by the way, it makes the test very, very robust. In a lot of the cases, we can see that the black box required to identify object by XPath. XPath can be relative. XPath can be changed between versions. And in this case, the identification of the objects in a white box concept in Espresso and XCUITest is better and makes your test much more reliable.
I want to highlight one more point, which is the difference of the coverage use cases, where when we're looking at Espresso and XCUITest, the testing are mainly on the application itself. You do test the UI, but you're really focused on the application itself. In some applications, there are more complex use cases require interaction between multiple applications or with the website, or those complex use cases, it's harder to implement them using Espresso. And XCUITest is part of the gaps or differences in the approach of those different frameworks. So let's talk about speed, and I think speed is one of the main driver that we saw organization adopting Espresso and XCUITest. Because of the architecture that Uzi mentioned before, by nature, Appium will run slower than Espresso and XCUITest. It not necessarily means that it runs slow. It means that it will run slower compared to Espresso and XCUITest because you constantly have a back and forth from the server to the application for every command that you execute. While Espresso and XCUITest, because of the architecture, that both applications are on the device and running side by side, they run much faster, and those are the benchmarks that at least we saw with execution that we did. Right, Uzi?
Yes, so if the same login will take us in Espresso 1 second, it's going to take 8 seconds on Appium and about 2 seconds in XCUITest. And it's actually, in the demo today, we are going to run some tests. You will see how fast is it to execute the end-to-end solution. So let's talk a little bit about the setup. The setup of testing, it's all, and when we're talking about setup, I'm not talking about only just run one test on my local device. I'm trying to talk about something more robust, about more than one device, about a few tests that runs over time, about mechanisms that support tags. So to set up it in Appium, it's hard. You need to install the Appium application. In some cases, if you have some different devices, you need to install the device driver. It's really hard to set up this this environment. And it's also hard to maintain it because all the time you need to make sure that the ADB connection is up and running and the Appium connected to the this version. If someone did it, he knows that there is a lot of flakiness in this setup and there is a lot of maintenance that need to be done. For Espresso and XCUITest, right now it's all connected into your developer environment. If you have Android Studio, if you have an XCUITest, you have a specific tag that allows you to run everything for them. By the way, you also have a recorder for the test directly from your environment. So it's really easy to create a test and to set up an environment on Espresso and XCUITest. And another thing that's important, because all you need to do is to install the application on the device, the setup of the execution environment is very simple. All you need to do is just send 2 files to the device, install it, and then trigger the tests.
Okay, so let's talk about the, which framework probably suits better the CI. And you can probably understand from the entire context of what we talked up until now, the false negative, the reliability and stability of the test, and the time it takes for those tests to run, we definitely see more and more Espresso and XCUITest embedded as part of the development CI, while we do see Appium run in some cases as a post-process or after a change happened, either during the night or as a parallel cycle that happens after the development is done. This is what we see, and this trend is actually growing as far as we see with our customers. So if a year ago we start to get more and more demands for Espresso, XCUITest, and embed them into the CI, now it comes much more frequent than before, and that's at least a trend that we see lately. Do you want to talk about XCUI, Uzi?
Yeah, so XCUITest is very easy to run on the CI, but it's really hard to set up because everything needs to be connected to iOS environment. So you need to have Mac on the cloud. So we have a lot of customers that set up their own library lab. So they have Macs in the cloud because they need to compile the application on the Mac, and then they need to push it to the real devices. So they have real devices. And because we are talking about only in the latest version, it can be compiled in parallel. So you need to set up a lot of machine in order to compile big application and to run it on a lot of devices. So because of all the needs of the new Mac machine, the setup of the CI for XCUITest will be hard. This is actually something that we simplify in Perfecto Mobile.
Yeah.
And do you want to add some
few
words about it?
Yeah, so I think that, regardless to those frameworks, when we start to see execution in the CI, then there is much more automation happen. You want to get a more reliable feedback. So it means that the environment itself needs to be more reliable. And this is where a cloud solution can really help you, especially a solution such as Perfecto, where we simplified all the setup. By the way, it also goes for Appium, so you don't need to set up the server machine. You can basically execute. So the entire setup of the automation itself is much easier today when you select when you go with Perfecto solution, because the infrastructure is there ready for you to execute on real device, which obviously provide you more reliable feedback than just a local emulator simulator, which by themselves are important, but you want to know exactly where you're going. So let's move forward. We have a lot of content. We have the demo, and we have a lot of questions coming in. So stay with us as we see the demo coming in. We want to save time for the demo.
So as we mentioned regarding the flakiness, we just talked about it. One of the things that I would like to talk and I would like to mention, the identifier, the object identifier is by ID. Most of the time when we're talking XCUITest and Espresso, and in Appium, it's going to be an external. It can be expat, but it can be ID. But if there is no ID, it will be expat, and this is why it affects the flakiness of the test.
Yeah, we will now drill down into that, the structure of those tests. And Uzi, maybe you can take us about the technology highlight and basically how you develop an Espresso test. We got some question on, will we see some code? So we're going to see some code. Let's understand what's the structure and the syntax of those frameworks.
Okay, so Espresso concept is quite simple. First of all, I want to find an element, and then I want to do any action on the element, and at the end, I would like to do some check, validation. Find element, actions, check. Very simple, very reliable. By the way, it allows you to create or to run some system level control as well. So let's see an example. So this is an example that I created on one of my applications. I have a calculator application. So first of all, on view means I wait to find an element. In this case, I wait to find an element with the text Perfecto card. And then when I found it, I just want to do some action. And my action will be check. Sorry, I don't want to do an action because it's just validation. So I want to have a check. So you can see on view, I find the element and then I run some check on the element and the check is valid. Another example is the line before it, below it, sorry. On view, when I see the object with the ID number, and you can see here when I create the script, I actually go directly to the R file to identify the object. And then I perform what I would like to do. I would like to type text. And then after that, I would like to close the keyboard. So you can see here I have the on view, I have the perform, and at that I also added some system level control. So this is actually a test in Espresso. It's look the same for the XCUITest. In XCUITest, you can see that I have a tag. In the left image, you can see that this is this is taken from the XCUITest, and you can see that I have a tag which is, or tab which is related to my test. In my test, I have all the element. Of course, I can get when I write it in the AP in the XCUITest and I write up and then dot, I have the autocomplete of all the actions that I have. So you can see there is a list of actions. And here is also very simple. I have action on the application. So first of all, I have my application and then I can do whatever I want. So in this case, I have the application and then I have text field. I identify the object by the ID, and then I can do some action. Very similar for Appium, if you remember. App is related to the web driver, and then I have the find element, and in this case, I identify the element by the object, and then I have the action. Click in Appium, tap here, type text, send text in Appium, type text here. So you can see it's actually very familiar to the concept of Appium. They replaced the web driver with the application itself because in this case we are talking directly to the application. So we talked about Appium. So this is how does it look in Appium. In Appium, you have to remember, first of all, I need to connect between my web driver into the application. So I need to identify the capability. What is the application and what is the device that I would like to use. This is the capability. And after I creating the capability, I'm asking to connect to this specific device. And then I have the driver. After having the driver, all I need to do is to find the element, identify the element by ID, by XPath, by any element, by any locator that I need, and then I do the action, send key or click. So if, as I mentioned before, and I'll return to the XCUITest, you can see application and action on the application, or application dot find the element and action on the element, very, very similar to the Appium. And all of them contain the same actions. I need to find an element, I need to have an action on an element, and I need to have some validation.
Yes, I just, the logic is pretty the same. The main difference is that while with Appium, we do see a lot of challenges to sync and wait for the object to appear. With Espresso and XCUITest, because you're working directly on the object, that address that challenge, and that's why part of the reason we see those tests more stable or less flaky, but the logic is the same as an approach for automation framework. And I think that's pretty helpful if you're moving now from Appium to Espresso XCUITest. The logic is kind of the same.
I agree. So XCUITest versus Express versus IID, I think that's something that you're familiar with, but I just want to give an highlight. In Express, you need to give the location on the tree, so you need to identify the object based on the location on the tree. In ID, you can go directly to the configuration file. I said, okay, this is my ID, and I can use the ID of the device. I just want to add one more comment that we have a new technology, and it's create a new bottleneck, and it's the bottleneck in the build environment. So developer and tester find XCUITest and Espresso very easy to use, and they are creating a lot of tests. And when Roy showed you the report that shows 12,000 execution in a day, it's something very common. The problem with that it can time. A lot of tests can take time. And if you connect it to the CI, sometimes the build will be quite long, and it can affect the build. The way that you need to handle it is to create the tags. I want to execute the small test, like very, very easy and fast sanity in the main build, and after that, every few hours to execute the full set that can take up to 90 minutes, and then to manage it, you have to remember it's really easy. It's real UI test. It runs really on the device, so it's not unit test. It's real end-to-end test. And what you need to do, it's you just need to manage your test in order to have a full and fast process.
Yeah, so I think the tagging is an extremely important point, running on parallel on multiple devices. And at the end of the day, we're not going to cover that in this webinar, but what should be the CI approach? What should I run as part of my pre-commit, commit, and CI process? That's something that a lot of teams are spending a lot of time to understand how they provide fast feedback while they get the right type of feedback in the development process. So a little bit about Perfecto and how we, what the uniqueness of our solution and how we make it even more robust and reliable. I want to touch a few points, and after that, we're going to deep dive into a demo. The first one, we talked about high scale of automation, and over there, there is a need to get better reports for Espresso, for sure better reports for XCUI that don't have a lot of information that is needed in order to understand quickly what went wrong and fix issues while tests are failing. So we have test report on the test level. We're gonna see also HAR reports, HAR embedded into the report. HAR is a very powerful traffic report that you can see exactly what happened between the application and the network, and drill down on performance, security, and other type of issues. Screenshot while you execute, screenshot on failure, video of execution, quickly filter based on specific builds, specific tags, and to see CI trends over time that are extremely important to know quality trends. Our solution is embedded into the development environment, which we mean we have Gradle plugin, very easy, and we do see teams are onboarding with our CI execution in our Espresso and XCUITest solution in a matter of not a lot of time, few minutes, a few hours, and they already start to run. DevTunnel help them to quickly isolate and debug issues and develop their test on the cloud. In addition, important capability is to run on the end user environment, change network, change orientation of the device, and basically get a full access on the end user environment in order to extend coverage. Perfecto is the only one that provides that capability. And all of that is running on an enterprise grade lab that can help you to be much more effective and optimized. So let's move to the demo.
So let's see that. So you promised them a lot of things, but I want to show you how does it work. We'll start from, I'm sharing my screen. I believe that you can see my screen right now. So what you can see here, this is a test that I created. So I created an application. It's a very simple application. I log into a page, and then I would like to validate some action.
Eran?
Yes, I don't think we can still see your screen. Maybe it's...
I can see his screen, and I'm connected from a different machine. Maybe it would be good to know if someone else can also see the screen, even in the chat or...
Okay, I will check it. If you can see it, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, just we just want to check in the if you can see the screen from the chat. Let us know. In the questions area, if you will be able to add the just want to make sure that we can see that. Oh, perfect. So I see that a lot of people can see the screen.
Okay. Perfect.
So we continue with the demo. So what you can see here, this is a test that I created. So there are a few tags. The tags that said, okay, this is my rule. I want to run my activity, test on the activity. And then this is my test, for example, the pass login. As you remember, I'm looking for the object user. I perform type text. I'm looking for the password. I perform the text. And at the end, I click on the button. So let me run this test on my local machine. I hit the run button. I select this emulator, and what happened right now, the application compiled, and the script runs very fast on the device. So I ran, I logged in, and it's passed for me. So this is really nice, but it's nice for a developer for a ad hoc test. I want to take it to the next step. I want to run it on the real devices. I want to run it on a lot of devices, and I want to do it in the cloud. So in order to do that, I added a connection. I connected to Perfecto Cloud. And the ways that I did it, I just added into the Gradle the configuration of Perfecto Mobile. I would like to connect to the cloud. I added my security token, and I added the configuration file. What are the configuration of my test? And in the configuration file, you can see that I identify a few devices. I would like to execute it on this specific device ID. I also want to execute it on Android with a Samsung. I want to execute it on one HTC and 2 other devices that will be selected automatically by the cloud itself. Another thing that you can see here that I had all the build parameter, what will be the tags, what is the job name, what is the build number. So now let's run build number 27. And at the end, I have some configuration regarding the network. I would like to run it on 4G network with latency of 5%. So I'm not only to control the devices, but I also control the environment. In order to run it, all I need to do is to run the Gradle Perfecto, and I'm about to show you what happened right now. So in the script itself, so this is Perfecto Mobile Cloud, and what you are about to see in a second, okay, so what happened right now, the script or the application being built, and after the application being built, it sent directly to Perfecto Mobile devices. All the devices that I asked actually been open on the device, on the cloud itself. So I asked for 5 devices. So here, 5 real devices actually opened. The application is about to install on all of the devices. So that will take 1 more second. And the moment that it installs the application, you can see that the automation start to run. It will start to run at the moment that the application will install. It's world parallel. And so right now, what you can see, all of the device executing my test. And I have a different test. One of the tests login with invalid user and password. The other ones login and check the balance. So now I had the test, and the test ended successfully.
I think, Uzi, just a quick comment. I think it's very easy to see how easy it is just to run in parallel and add devices, right? one line of code and that's it. You can add as many devices as you want. You can run in sharding. You can parallel the execution, which can really help you to increase the coverage and run faster.
And another important thing, everything can be connected to the CI because I have all the parameters for the CI. So of course I execute it here from my environment, but the right way to do it is to upload everything into your Jenkins machine. And you can see that all the results return directly to my screen. I can see that I have some failure and I want to understand what happened, why I got some failure. So as you remember, we do have a reporting environment. So let's go to our Perfecto system right now and see and try to understand what happened. So remember, this build is build 27. So I'm going right now to Perfecto reporting system, and I'm starting with the CI dashboard. The CI dashboard showed me all my applications. So remember, this is Perfecto Bank, and this is my latest build. It's 27. So in build 27, I can see that I had 16 test cases. 4 of them ended with error. So I want to drill down directly to all of these tests. So immediately I can see all of the tests that have been part of the execution. And let's see what happened with the test that ended with error. Immediately I can see that it's looked for the text or for the balance of 4,203, and the balance here is actually 533. So yes, in this case, I created an error in the test itself, but you see how easy it right now to analyze the results. Why? Because you can see the script, you can see the screenshot, but you also can see the video of the test itself. And this is something very powerful that does not embedded today in the Espresso and XCUITest. The ability to get the full scenario, the full list of the tests that have been executing and what is the result. So together with this easy way to configure it, you have a very easy way to understand what happened. And when we are talking about easy way to understand or to analyze the results, it's very important because we do have thousands of scripts and thousands of automations.
It's pretty aligned to what we see at the beginning. It's hard to understand how to develop automation tests. Once you've reached that, how do I run in parallel? And then when you figure that out, now you have thousands of execution, how I can get the right information in order to isolate the problem. So I think what we just saw is that with Espresso, XCUITest, and Perfecto, it's easy to develop the test, execute in parallel, and more than that, really know what happened and quickly isolate the problems.
Exactly. Now I want to show you one more tool. It's a very strong tool that I want to understand what happened behind the scene. What is the network, or what is the request that you sent to the network from the application, and what was the response from the web server that shows me this result, the 5,733. So I'm going into the network file, and in the network file, I'm being able to download a HAR file. So what you can see here, that a HAR file being created, and now I want to understand what do I have here. HAR file, it contains all the traffic, all the network traffic. So how do I learn and see what happened on this traffic? So I'm going into the web, and I'm open HAR viewer. By the way, there is a lot of way to see HAR, but I want to show you one util that I'm using. So this is my HAR viewer, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag and drop my HAR file into this file. And what you can see here is that I have a request, and this is the request that's been sent, and this is the response that I got. And I can see that the response is actually quite long based on the values that I saw, or based on the values that I expected to see, which is just 3 or 4 digits. So I'm going to copy it, and I just want to tell you that this is a base 64. So let me convert it to a base, regular base. And what you can see here is that the actions contains, or the response contains a lot of actions. So the network sent me all the transactions, including the total. My application show only the total. So in this case, I know that I sent too much data to the device. Of course, that this is very naive solution, but I showed you this solution because we saw these cases in a different a customer of us that sent a lot of details on the network that was not relevant to the application itself. I would like to stop sharing right now and return to the demo in order to summarize.
So, so right now, let's go over the main items or the main topics that we talked about today. We do see increase of XCUITest and Espresso. They are more used by the developers or by dev tester, people with the technical skills that either are part of the Agile team or sit next to the developers. They run faster. In many cases, they are more reliable, less flaky. They are very good and very valuable when you're looking at pre-commit or CI fast feedback. And this is where we see them more and more. While Appium still has a lot of value, it does provide a full coverage in some cases, depends on the use cases. It also depends on the skills of the organization, the capabilities, the knowledge within the organization, access to the code, and some other things that we covered before. Very common to see them running during the night and provide a more complete feedback to the development teams or to the QA early in the morning. And they are very valuable for full regression testing. So on one hand, we see increase of Espresso and XCUITest. Overall, we do see more and more automation embedded into the development process as an essential capability needed for DevOps. There is a place for both frameworks, and you just need to know the pros and cons of each one of those frameworks. So that's at least what we wanted to cover today. We have a lot of questions that came in, and maybe we now can start to go over some of those questions and touch them and elaborate. Thank you very much for joining today. Ran, do you want to kind of walk us through some of the questions?
Sure. I know we have short time, so I'll try to focus at least on the three important ones that I could dig. Again, there are too many questions for us to address in the 5 minutes left. So one of the questions was, can you use Espresso and XCUITest to test applications from the app stores, when you don't have really the access to the source code?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and unfortunately, as part of what we talked about, the limitation or the structure of Espresso and XCUITest, you need to have access to the source code. As I mentioned before, for Espresso, we were able to do some kind of development that require re-instrumentation, but it requires high technical skills. So the short answer is no, you need to have access to the source code in order to develop those kind of tests.
Perfect. Another question came in about two other frameworks associated with iOS, and do we support XCUITest and Keef?
Yes, so it's a very good question. Perfecto, we do have support today for, we are going to officially release our support for Keef and XCUI and XCUITest in the near future. We are now running an early access. We already have some customers. The official release should be towards the end of this year, in the next few weeks. I want to add one more framework that we have seen, which is Earl Grey. I also saw a question about Earl Grey. So this framework is also supported with Perfecto.
And the question related to Earl Grey was also, can it be used instead of XCUITest? Earl Grey is a framework that is provided by Google. So my take on that is that it can be used for testing UI elements for iOS, but since it's not coming or fully supported by Apple, you may have some supporting issues, capabilities when testing the latest iOS applications. What's your take on that, Uzi or Roy?
So yeah, I do agree. I think that those frameworks, each one of them has some uniqueness or special capabilities. Overall, I think if you have value with Earl Grey, and lately I've seen more and more teams actually validating Earl Grey, at the end of the day, it rides on top of the standard APIs that Apple provide. So, if you do see the value over there, then I don't see any reason why not adopting it. But it's probably too early, as we see the increase of stabilization of XCUITest mainly in the last year, and we need to keep track on that. And it's a bit early to come with a clear, recommendation. I would validate it, and as I said, if it does give you value, then I would recommend to go with it.
Okay, if we have time, there was only one last question that came in that I wanted to address to you, and it was about the flakiness comment that you made comparing the three frameworks. Do we see a specific flakiness risk with Appium maybe compared to other frameworks like Espresso, XCUITest, Earl Grey?
So we talked about it. So most of the flakiness, when we're talking about Espresso, most of the flakiness related to the object identifiers that have been changed. And that's because of the nature of the identification of the objects. Another thing is because of the behavior of the device, specific pop-up that been generated on the device. Because you have to remember, when the test runs, the device does not know that it's a test because it's connect externally from the device. And for the XCUITest and Espresso, that the automation there is embedded with the device itself. The application is part of the, or the hooks are part of the OS system. So the handle of all the external events are much better. And this is why it's less flakiness. I'm not saying that it's something that dramatically different, but 5% in 10,000 test cases can do a lot of noise. In Espresso, sorry, in Appium, something that you don't have in Espresso and XCUITest.
Excellent. So that's for today from a question. The one that couldn't be addressed today, we'll follow up post the webinar with the attendees. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much. That does end our event for today. I'd like to thank our speakers, Eran, Uzi, and Roy for their time. I'd like to thank Perfecto for sponsoring this event. And as Eran said, all the questions we couldn't get to live, we will get to the rest offline. And a special thank you goes out to you, the audience, for spending the last hour with us. Have a great day, and we hope to see you at a future event.